recording the session. Oh, thanks a lot.
Yeah, sorry,
Okay, great.
I didn't want to say, but yes, we are recording. So for everybody attending, this webinar is recorded for distribution purposes.
Great, and I think I can confirm just up front as well, Benedette, that the presentation will also be shared. So we'll send it to yourselves, and you can share it with your membership as well. It can even go to some of your members that couldn't make it. We'll be happy that they have access to the presentation as well. So I think with that said, just to kick off, so, by way of introductions, my name is Dinesh Naidu. I head up the local content verification team. I'm based, I'm within SABS, based in KwaZulu-Natal. So I run the KZN SABS office from a direct perspective, but I'm also very much involved in the local content department itself. So just by way of background, and just before we go into the specific topic around local content and localization, SABS itself plays a multitude of roles, and so we're very active in the space of standards and standardization. And you'll see that there are about 7,300 standards that SABS administers at any given time, and you'll find that on a year-to-year basis, anything from between 280 to about 300 standards is what the standards division is working with, revising, updating, adopting. So there's a lot of active work taking place in the space of standards. The other core area is that of conformity assessments, which is our product certification, where the SABS mark of approval is given to and assigned to various products. And the other area is that of system certification, covering things like the ISO 9001 and ISO suite of standards. Local content as a division falls within the conformity assessment area. And then the last part of it is the work we're doing very much in the localization space, where it's really what we're striving towards is moving beyond just the compliance to that of supply development per se. We also have active divisions involved with training, where we have a training platform where it's both training that is in the classroom environment as well as remote training where we run online sessions. So all of this is the bundle and suite of services from a SABS perspective. This just gives a pictorial view of what I've just covered, and some of the areas that we focus on, the testing of products, where I spoke about the product certification. But for the product certification to really work for us, we have laboratories where we have in excess of 72 different laboratories covering the different scope of products and services in that particular space. But our laboratories also cut across testing where it's not necessarily for the SABS mark, but it's general testing of products that they would also embark on. Consignment inspection is another big area of our business, and it's grown quite significantly, especially during the COVID period, where due to the situation we found ourselves in as a country, products had to be verified on pretty short notice. And consignment inspection just took off during that period itself. So I'm diving straight into the area of local content and the topic of today. And I thought it'll just be important that I share these two approaches. So local content kicked off back in 2011 when SABS was appointed as the chosen agency on behalf of the DTIC to conduct local content verifications. The formula that you see on the left-hand side is really the again SANS 1286, which is the specification or the standard for local content verification. And that particular approach around designation was such that the DTIC had done a significant amount of work designating various sectors. Furniture was one of them, textiles and clothing, and you'll see shortly some of the other designated sectors as well. So the one formula around the designated sectors it's very much, the left-hand side is a very what I would refer to as a reactive approach, whereby a tender has to be awarded. Once a tender is awarded and there's a winning bidder, then the work then commences based on the winning bid. So the significant difference between the two formulas that you see, the left-hand side talks to the tender price, and because it's dependent on tenders that come out, a winning bidder, which means at that given time, it's based on the tender price that is submitted as part of the tender process. The slide on the right-hand side, the difference is that it talks about the selling price of the product, and the calculation on the right-hand side is really just looking at it from a proactive basis, where any supplier that wants to verify and confirm their local content percentage has the opportunity to follow the route of the formula on the right, which talks about our local content grading scheme. So I will go into more detail around it, but I thought this would just set the scene for the discussion itself. I spoke about the designated sectors, and this is the work that the DTIC was very actively working on since 2011. And you can see that these are the various designated sectors and the designated percentages that have been defined. I've highlighted right up front that these slides will be shared with you, so you don't have to make notes around this, and you'll have access to these various designations that you see. So the challenge we have, and why I thought we needed to have this conversation right up front, is that unfortunately, the preferential procurement regulations were replaced in 2017. So the 2017 version was replaced in 2022 as at 16th of Jan. What this regulation has done when it came out on the 16th of Jan is that it leaves it completely up to the organs of state to determine their preferential procurement policies. And so the challenge we have is that currently, with the withdrawal of the old requirements on the old act, the requirements for local content verification is not currently documented in the 2022 version of the preferential procurement regulations. And it's important that this is highlighted right up front, because the good work that has been done on designation and designated sectors, there isn't a legislation or ruling that we have that makes it compulsory as we speak. And you'll see that in the next slide. So what it means is that it's no more compulsory for local content to be declared in tenders. The DTIC, though, and which is the regulating body in this regard, has in writing and verbally raised the risk of not properly regulating local content with National Treasury. But unfortunately, these regulations that then came out in 2022, the regulations that were then published excluded the requirements for local content verification. So if tenders no longer have the local content requirements, it's important that I stress that it does not mean that organs of state are flouting the law per se. It is more a legal requirement to do so as per the requirements itself. The DTIC is engaging on this particular topic, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get organizations, state-owned companies, and government institutions to write local content requirements into their procurement policies and to continue to enforce this particular requirement. So I think this slide, I'm going to pause on it for a moment. And I think we'll read it specifically so that there's clarity around the way forward. So the Public Procurement Bill, which was finalized for consultation at NEDLAC in November 2022, now includes local procurement measures, but it must first be enacted by Parliament before local content can be compulsory again. So if I can pause there on the Public Procurement Bill, this bill has already gone before Parliament, and it went before Parliament in March. However, as we are aware, the processes turn a little bit more slowly, and as a result, we've got to wait for this particular bill to be enacted before the requirements of local content become compulsory again. So what does this mean? It means now that all tenders that were issued prior to the 16th of January, all of those tenders still follow the requirements of local content verification and the designated sectors. So that would mean that provided that those tenders were awarded prior to the 16th of Jan, the SABS as the organization that conducts these verifications on behalf of the DTIC, we are still actively engaging this process and continuing with these verifications. And as we speak, there are about 15 or 20 projects that the SABS team are busy with in the space of designation and designated sectors. So as per the exemption process, if we go to the second bullet point, it clarifies now that these tenders that were awarded prior to 16th of Jan, that we will continue to do those verifications. As per the exemption process, if the product is not available locally, bidders would have to request letters of exemption. So that process still stands, and that will apply to any tender that was awarded prior to the 16th of Jan. So where does it leave local content and localization? Fortunately, from a SABS perspective, SABS had launched back in 2021 a local content grading scheme. And this was designed for any supplier or manufacturer wanting to leverage on the fact that their products are manufactured locally. It spoke to and it's guided by an upfront verification process, and the target is both the public and private sectors. And this particular local content grading scheme covers certification over a 5-year period. So the launch of the standard took place in 2021. At that stage, SABS was not privy to the fact that there might be any changes in how the local content landscape might change. But fortunately, this had happened. And when SABS launched this particular scheme, it closed a gap in the marketplace, and it's now allowed us to continue in the space of localization and local content verification through this independent mechanism. So we will be spending some time talking about the local content grading scheme and this tool and mechanism that you as the industry can have access to and can leverage on whilst we wait for the procurement bill to become enforced, and we will then be able to revert back to the procurement bill, which will then fully incorporate requirements for local content and localization. So the local content grading scheme, how it works is that it caters for any manufacturer that wants to come on board and declare and have an independent verification and confirmation of their local content grade and have a certificate that talks to this. So the grading scheme doesn't create any thresholds, but what it rather does is it allows any manufacturer to come on board, which means that you can be at the highest end of the grade, which is a grade A, anything from 90 to 100%, but you could also have a supplier who complies at anything between 1 to 9%, and that will then give that supplier a certificate with a grade J. So you can see the full range of the grades in between. How does local content verification work, and what is the process? And I think this is where you as delegates that have joined this webinar would find this of interest. The verification process is covering 2 core activities. There's a technical verification, and that looks at the technical manufacturing aspects that go into a particular product. It looks at all the input material, and it looks at where is that input material sourced and where is that input material manufactured. The verification process itself covers those 2 stages. And from a SABS perspective, I have a team of auditors that cover both the financial verification, which is the numbers, looking at the typical bill of materials, looking at the various invoices and documents that support and confirm whether these products have been sourced and sourced from manufacturers within the borders of South Africa. The technical verification team is there to support our financial auditors, and what they are able to do is provide guidance to the financial auditors in terms of what can and can't be made locally, what is being made, and what is the factory capabilities to be able to make these products locally. So typically, this single slide gives you the end-to-end verification process, which starts with the request for the verification, where SABS will then receive the various documents from a supplier. SABS will then conduct what we refer to as a scoping process. And from the scoping, we'll then be able to generate a quotation. Once the quotation is submitted to the applicant will then accept that quotation, and we would then move from the scoping and planning phase to the second core activity, which is that of the verification. The verification itself involves a combination of off-site and on-site work, but a lot of that work involves engagements and visits to suppliers. So we would start with the applicant, which we would then, in terms of from a terminology perspective, refer to that as the tier 1 supplier. But that will then move to what we then refer to as tier 2 suppliers, tier 3, and even tier 4 suppliers, depending on the full extent of the value chain. Once the various verification levels are covered and the SABS team are satisfied on the grade that can be assigned to this particular verification, then we then move into what we refer to as the reporting stage, where the report is generated, the local content verification report, and from there, a submission is then made by SABS to the SABS Independent Verification Approvals Board, where the full process is vetted independently, confirmed, and that particular proposed grade is then added to a formal certificate, which is then awarded to the applicant. So this, in a nutshell, is the end-to-end local content verification process. I will then unbundle this in a little bit more detail and break it up so that we can focus on different areas. So again, what this slide does, it's a replica of what we've just covered, where it kind of highlights the request, moving into what I refer to as the scoping, the creation of the quotation. Once that quote is accepted, we then conduct the verification itself. Once the supplier is compliant, a certificate is issued. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, these certificates are issued for a 5-year period, which means that during the 5-year period, we need to still have confidence that the supplier is still complying with the requirements as verified on day 1. And so on an annual basis, there are annual surveillance audits conducted to confirm and verify that the supplier is still maintaining the grade that is shown on its certificate. The other big benefit of this annual verifications that take place in the 5-year cycle is that suppliers have the opportunity to increase and improve their grade, which means that based on the initial verification, they can then look at how do they, over the 5-year period, procure more products from local manufacturers, which then allows their grade to be reviewed and moves them into a higher local content percentage. The opposite is also possible during this 5-year period, whereby suppliers stop or the winning bidder or the applicant or the certificate holder makes a decision to purchase some of the products for various reasons from imported suppliers, where the product comes in from the overseas market. And as a result, in those cases, it could mean that local content percentage changes and that particular bidder gets a lower overall grade. So the purpose of the verification over the 5-year cycle is to make sure that the certificate holder has and reflects what is the current status of what is happening at that company at that point in time. So what is local content? And for the, for the layman out there, some of the things that contribute to the local content percentage are things like, one, is there a physical plant? And remember, we spoke about the various input material that goes into the manufacture of a product, which means that we're looking at the end-to-end value chain. So we're looking at physical plants for the various input material that goes into the product. We look to see that there's local manufacture, there's locally produced input material, but the other strong factor is, are you using local labor? And so where localization and local content also plays a huge role is in this whole drive towards creating local employment. So local labor plays a strong role. What we try to do is to look at how do we ensure through the local content process that we avoid duplication at lower tiers, implying that if a supplier is procuring from a lower tier supplier, and that supplier already has a local content certificate, we don't duplicate and add to the verification, but rather use those certificates. And all our auditors will then verify is that there's traceability, that the applicant in this particular case has bought his products from a supplier, and we've got clear documentation that shows that the input material for a new applicant has come from a supplier that already holds a certificate. So again, I'm unbundling for you and breaking up the three phases that we spoke about. We spoke about the preliminary stage or the pre-verification. That was the scoping and planning. The fieldwork stage or the verification, this is the actual work that's done covering tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers. And the last phase being that of the reporting. So we go back to the preliminary stage just to give you an indication of what are some of the key pillars that are involved. One, we look at, it covers the tracking of suppliers. We look at receiving from the applicant what we refer to as the bill of materials. And the bill of materials really covers the various input materials that go into the manufacture of the product. I want to then, at this early stage, give you the assurance as well that there are non-disclosure agreements signed with the applicants, so that all that information that might be viewed as confidential is certainly dealt with and handled in that same manner, so that information that is being shared remains the confidentiality is guaranteed, and these non-disclosure agreements are in place. You'll see that it's all about costing out through the bill of materials and making sure that we are able to verify what goes into the manufacture of the product and ties up with that eventual selling price that the suppliers provide to us. The fieldwork stage really looks at the actual work that's done, starting with the tier 1 supplier and the winning bidder. And like I mentioned, it progresses all the way to your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers. So the end-to-end process becomes critical. And so local content is not just about what the tier 1 supplier experiences, but rather how do we ensure that the value chain and the sourcing of the input material that goes into the end-to-end value chain is coming from local manufacturers. The reporting stage really then goes into tying up various bits of information, making sure that between the technical auditors at SABS and the financial auditors at SABS, that the two teams are putting their information together and that the final report ties back to the actual grade that is assigned to that particular verification. And so this slide just in summary gives you the overview of the process, starting from the initial phase of client applying, becoming a certificate holder, what happens between year 2 and year 5, how do we then recertify that client, and how do we then ensure that that client certificate can be extended for the further 5 years based on the grade that's then verified at that point in time as we go forward. To bring it home and to just give context to it, we thought it'll be important that we just share some live examples. So, in your particular space, if we take a typical school desk, the tier one supplier or the applicant that applies to have a local content certificate issued to him would typically, as an example, apply for a product, as in this case being a school desk. This would typically, and again, this at a very high level, highlight some of the main input material that goes into this desk. And you can see you would have the material being the wood, the steel frame, and typically the nails or screws, depending on what's being utilized. How this will unbundle in the form, and very much at a high level, this is what the audit team at SABS will be verifying. So firstly, the applicant will supply his bill of materials, which should typically cover these different items. You'll see that the steel frame in the example that was shown on the previous screen shows you the color of the frame. For that frame for the color to be added, there will also be paint that's applied to it. So you start to see that the input material goes beyond just the core main items that you see. So you see that there's the wooden plank, and typically what we've done is we've given just an indication. These are just fictitious numbers that you can see, but that's typically giving an indication of the number of units the number of planks that go into this, the unit price, the total value of the wood, the fact that this comes from a company A, and the audit team at SABS. Firstly, the applicant will do a declaration that says, according to his declaration, that wooden plank is being sourced from a local manufacturer, and according to the information available to the applicant, that material is local. What the SABS team then will do is conduct a verification at that local manufacturer that will then confirm that that wood is indeed being made locally, and the input materials that go into the manufacture of that wood is being sourced from local manufacturers as well. That process will unbundle to company B, which is the mounting screws or mounting nails, the steel frame, and then if that steel frame is colored, then where is that paint being sourced? And that will then be a further verification that's done. If there's a varnish that's utilized, then that as well will go into that, and that's just a typo on that, but it'll be varnish that's utilized. And if that varnish is coming from a local manufacturer or an importer, that will be verified. But that typically gives a high level of how the bill of materials is unbundled and how the verification process unfolds. This then just adds further complications, if I can stipulate that, where you can see that, yeah, there's multiple and additional input materials to what we saw in the first example. And again, you could see that in this example, that the input materials can cross into other technical areas. So if the seat is not made if the seat itself is not made of wood, but let's say it's a material of plastic, then suddenly this verification moves out of the field of wood and starts to now go into a supplier that's in the plastics side of the business. And so where this becomes important is that from a SABS perspective, we have access to a pool of just over 100 technical auditors. And these auditors come from a diverse technical background, which means that if it's a varnish or a paint product, we have chemical auditors that understand how those products are made and will then conduct the verification of that tier supplier related to that varnish or that paint that's being utilized. If it's a supplier of a seat base where it's a plastic seat base, then our team that's involved in plastic manufacturing would then go to the manufacturer of the plastic seats, and we'll then be able to do a similar verification. And why I'm taking time to explain this is that I want us to appreciate that local content is not just what we necessarily would see on face value as the core manufacturer buying these input materials from local suppliers and then concluding that this is then 100% local content. It's important to understand that we drill down to the various input materials and we drill down to the suppliers themselves. And we get to those suppliers as well as part of the verification process so that there's confidence that the end-to-end process is local and that the end-to-end process is utilizing local labor, is being made at a local factory. And these are all important factors that contribute to the initiative around localization. The third example, and this is the last physical example that you'll see, is just so you can see it from a different perspective. Most of you would be dealing with workwear where your teams utilize overalls and workwear. And again, if we had an applicant that's looking at the local content verification on workwear, then you'd see that just at a high level, there's sewing thread that goes into this, there's fabric, there's zip fasteners, there's reflective strips. And all of this is sourced and comes from different areas of the textile industry and different suppliers. And what you could typically find in a case like this is that the demand for a certain type of fabric, depending on the manufacturing environment where these the workwear is being utilized, might call for something that might be flame retardant or might have to carry certain characteristics whereby the material cannot be manufactured or sourced from a local supplier, which means that when you do your tracing, you might find a local agent, but the manufacturer is not a plant in South Africa. So that in itself will then separate the input materials between local and imported. And based on that, we'll then be able to conclude on the percentage that contributes from an input material side on being local versus imported. So as we get to the latter part of the presentation, these are just some of the benefits of local content localization. One, it provides data to all of us, and it allows you to be able to source from local suppliers, local manufacturers. So if you're buying a component that goes into your, that's an input to one of your products, then what the whole drive around localization does is it allows you to know that there are local suppliers for this, there are local manufacturers for this, and you can get your products up front. The key process around this particular local content grading scheme and the scheme that SABS has launched is it's an upfront verification, which means that you don't have to wait for a tender to be awarded. You don't have to wait to become a supplier or a winning bidder before you can have your independent verification done on your contribution towards localization. It certainly can be used for marketing purposes, and it really, in a nutshell, provides that overall credibility around declarations that are being made around localization. There are constant questions raised around the cost of localization, and I thought I'd cover this, whilst we're looking at this particular slide. As you can see from the complexity of local content and the local content verification value chain, we really need to drill down and we really need to get to these various tier suppliers. So with that in mind, there needs to be an appreciation that local content and there's a cost associated with this. But typically, if you take the local content costs, and if you look at the 3 steps in the process, it's typically split. 20% of the cost goes into the pre-verification work, 60% goes into the verification, and 20% goes into the finalization of the report and the issuing of the certificate. So the typical cost pie is broken up into 20%, 60%, and 20%. The costs, unfortunately, it's not possible to say to you, this is what a typical cost would be, and here's a benchmark. And the main reason for that is because each process and each type of product, the range of costs could vary based on the various input materials and the various verification station points that go into that particular complexity, and for SABS to be able to then declare on that final verification grade. However, this is where, and when we get to the Q&A side of things, Reza Shah, our sales manager that's on the team, he'll take you through the typical high-level documents that he will share with potential applicants, and he will then guide the typical process. Some of the things that we can also look at as we go forward is from an association point of view, because there's a common interest. As we get applicants, we can start to share benchmark pricing to the association itself based on typical products, and these can be viewed as work in progress as we move forward. So at this very stage, when it comes to the local content grading scheme, this particular product that SABS has launched, we've already issued 20 certificates in this particular space. We're currently working with one supplier that's just accepted a quote, and we already have 2 of the accepted quotes where we're viewing it as work in progress. So we're hoping that in this financial year, the 20 certificates will move to something like between 35 to 40. The interest since April of this year, which is our new financial year, has really grown quite significantly, and especially with the fact that the procurement bill is moved to a more mature stage. What we are finding is that a lot of organizations are being proactive and are wanting to pursue this route of the local content grading scheme, so that when the procurement bill comes into effect, they are not finding themselves reacting at that stage, but rather they have already moved down the route of localization. They've got these independent local content grading scheme certificates. And when this whole tender process, once the procurement bill becomes live again, and the requirements for local content and the designated sectors kicking fully through the DTIC and Treasury, what we are hoping then is that these organizations that have been proactive will already be able to start tendering, knowing that they have these certificates in place. So I'm going to pause there. I think I've reached the very tail end of the presentation itself. Again, I've highlighted that these slides will be shared with the institution, and so you as members will get access to this. Our contact details appear on this. So my divisional head, Katima Temba, his details are on this. My details are on it, and Reza's details from a sales management perspective appear on this as well. So I'm going to, at this stage, stop there. I'm going to thank you for your time. I'm hoping this has been useful and been beneficial. And I'd like to then, allow for the floor to be open to questions, and we'll allow Reza to then come in as well to share in some of the responses. Thank you, and over to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dinesh. And all the attendees, just give me a second to enable all the sound and video. What I just want to ask from all the attendants is please put up your hand if you've got a question. Remember, if you do not want to voice it, you can still do a Q&A section or in the chat if you've got certain questions for Reza or Dinesh. Bernadette, is there anything you want to say before I open up the panels, the attendees' sound?
No, it's fine. You can. It was a very insightful presentation. Thank you, Dinesh, but you can proceed. Thanks a lot, Bjorn.
Okay, just give me a second. It takes a little bit to do that. Sorry, guys. It's longer than I wanted.
I think just while we're waiting, Bjorn, Dinesh, I just wanted to ask, when you mentioned that you'd share the benchmark prices for verifications, tell me, would that be aggregated, consolidated benchmark prices? There wouldn't be any ComCom issues with regards to that.
Thanks for that, Bernadette. So I think maybe what I was proposing in there is that it's something that we'd followed through together with yourself. So I thought that as a follow-up meeting that we'll then set up, if the thinking on this is that if within your membership there's interest in going down this route, we could then through you as the central coordination point, we could then look at 2 or 3 products that you might have. And if there might be 2 options, as an example, if there's a generic option of, here's average prices of the various input materials, then what we could then do is we could then do a mock-up of that and make that available as a kind of benchmarking that we could do. So it was that proposal. And the main reason, I think you've touched on it already, is, whilst we might have a membership, but each of your members could be competitors as well. And so there would be confidential information that we can't divulge on a public platform. So my thinking was, how do we start the conversation? Are there certain, typical products that you have that are standard in your industry? And are there, a mock-up of prices that the association can provide to us so that we can pursue that? I hope that gives some clarity. And that's an approach we've taken with other associations, just so that we can start this whole initiative of starting to give an idea of what this would cost. I hope that gives the clarity. Thanks.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, so sound has been enabled. Everybody that wants to ask a question, please put up your hand and disable your microphone, and you can ask a question in this forum.
Bjorn, I'd suggest while we're waiting for questions, maybe if there's just an opening remark from Riza, that he wants to flag to the membership, I think we can give him that opportunity, and then it'll allow for questions to be then taken in parallel. Thanks, Bjorn.
No problem. Riza, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm busy nursing a bit of a flu, so I do cough intermittently as I'm speaking. I'm the sales manager currently based in the Western Cape. I touch on various aspects within the SABS, local content being one of those. And yeah, we look forward to fielding your questions, giving you some ease, and then assisting you on the journey where you find yourselves at a point of uncertainty. As stated by Dinesh, there are certain changes coming in from the preferential procurement regulation, and I'll share some of the work we're doing with the organs of state to assist and encourage them to include localization to support local manufacturers in South Africa. So we look forward to your questions, and yeah, let's get going.
Thank you, Riza. Clinton, I see your hand is up. You can switch on your camera as well if you want to. If not, you're more than welcome to ask questions.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Clinton Skippers. I head up a manufacturing concern here in the Western Cape. Was also part of the panel that put the Local Content Act together many years ago. Just to give you a background, Riza and Dinesh, I don't know you guys, but we manufacture basically steel, wood, upholstery, and we've also invested money in molds so that we could obviously tap into the injection molding side of the business as well. I am a bit disappointed that it took us many years to get the Local Content Act passed, and it was sort of abolished, for the lack of a better terminology, without us even knowing about it. Well, I didn't know about it. I think it's a sad thing for manufacturers, because the whole idea of the act was to create jobs, and the current unemployment rate in this country, I don't see how this could have been abolished without having some proper thought or comments from industry leaders and so forth. My question to you, Riza, is this going to become a compulsory requirement for state organ tenders or RFQs? Because you're expecting us as manufacturers, which are already in a tight economy, to foot the bill for this verification. And if it's not going to benefit us in the long run, it is really in terms of financially, because we're all in business to try and make money. We're not making money, but we try and make money. So in the long run, if we're going to be embarking on this expense, are we going to recover the expense? In my opinion, tongue-in-cheek comment, is just not another money-making scheme, just so that we could enable the SABS to get some income revenue. once again, apologies if I'm offending anyone, but understand why I feel so critical about it. Our current Premier, Ellen Windy, was part of that whole team. And yes, we had to jump thousands of hoops to get this thing through. So I'm very, very concerned that it's actually going to negatively impact the industry. The other question is, you mentioned that you're going to extend it to our suppliers as well. Hypothetically, let's say we're talking injection molding. So yes, we get a molded back or seat from a injection molder, which then extends to the plastic industry or chemical industry, as you mentioned earlier on, Dinesh. But do you go as far as to say, well, where are you getting a raw material from? Because if it's not locally bought from SAFI or SAFS or one of those organizations, which also has a bit of a monopoly, it will be an imported content. How do you extend that to? Where do you draw the line in terms of local verification to suppliers? For instance, yes, we get our plastic back from an injection molder. He molds it in South Africa, but the raw materials come from, let's say, China. How are you guys going to overcome that? So yeah, thanks very much, guys. I might have more questions later on.
Okay, Clinton, thank you very much for your question. There's two parts to your question. The first part relates to the validity and mandatory nature of local content. And in its current state, the preferential procurement regulation has stipulated that localization will not be excluded, however, remains within the auspices of the procuring entity's ambit to decide on the level of localization. So what are we going to be doing to support industry? I think that's a more burning question in relation to the response that I'm going to give you. As SABS, we are focusing on educating local state organs within the procurement environment. We are focusing on supporting those procurement environments in enabling them to include localization in their bids and tenders. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I work very closely with a lot of the procuring entities in the Western Cape, and there is a big focus on localization within the context of the Western Cape currently. Whether this will become a mandatory requirement again, I wouldn't hazard a guess to give you an answer on that. I feel that resides within the auspices of ourselves, the SABS, the DTI, and the engagements unfolding with National Treasury as we speak. So yes, there may be changes, but in its current state, it is a voluntary requirement from a manufacturer's perspective. Yes, a procuring entity can stipulate it, and that is the angle that we are focused on as the SABS, is in supporting those entities, in educating them on the changes with regards to the Act and how best we can enable and support them when they put tenders out, requiring designated products or products included within the ambits of local content. So, Clinton, I hope that gives you a little bit of comfort in terms of the response. And yes, it was a shock for all of us. It came about because of a court case that led to National Treasury repealing the decision, amongst others. And I'm sure that the ministries that are engaging currently, as stated, we are putting forward recommendations and awaiting responses on those. I think with the latter part of the question, I'm going to hand over to Dinesh, because that's a little bit more technical in the local content environment. I can give a response to it. Yes, we go down to the raw materials, right down to supplier level tier 4. So depending on where the plastic is being procured from, that plastic may then be deemed an import if it is being brought from countries like China, etc. One needs to also understand that I hear the comment on the Sasol's monopoly. However, it still speaks to localization and the support of local entities. So that's a bit of a slippery slope. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on that. I'll hand over to Mr. Dinesh and allow him to respond on the latter part of your question. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Reza. I think I'll just pick up from where you left off. And maybe just on the first question, and I think, it is disheartening, I think, for all concerned. SABS was appointed as the verification agency. So I just want to clarify an important point, and that is when it comes to the regulation itself and the standard and the rules around it, SABS doesn't get involved and can't get involved in the rules and the regulations. So the decision that's been taken is a decision, a lot of that sits within the DTIC, it sits with National Treasury. And in this particular case, Clinton, I can certainly confirm that this has been as a result of a court interdict. So the minister was actually taken to court around what was viewed as the validity of local content, not necessarily a disagreement on the requirements of local content, but a lot of it seemed to have been around the designation and those percentages. And so with this procurement bill that I've made reference to, which has already gone before Parliament, it was already presented in March. If you play back the tape, what it means is that once the procurement bill comes into effect, it means that local content and its requirements will become effective again. And that becomes the game changer. So I hope that answers your first question. It's dependent on that decision around how soon that procurement bill becomes effective. And the moment that happens, then local content requirements become mandatory again. What is happening in the interim is that organs of state, government entities have been requested, and the DTIC are still doing this, lobbying, as you will call it. They are lobbying these government institutions to write local content requirements into their procurement rules, which then makes it an inclusion within tenders. But that's the approach DTIC is trying to take whilst the procurement bill is awaiting finalization. So I think that is the first part of the response. The second part, I think Riza's covered it as well, in that we would go down all the way to that final tier of supplier, right to the input material, and what I would refer to as the mill. And so in this particular case, the percentage contribution will be factored in. And with the local content grading scheme that I shared with you, it will just impact on some of those components then being identified as imported. And that goes into the calculation that will then show to what percentage does that impact on the overall selling price of the product. And that in itself will then inform the final decision on the grade. I'm hoping, Clinton, it gives that clarity. And maybe beyond, we should just allow Clinton to come in before we take the next speaker. Thanks.
Okay, the next speaker will be Sandile Buthelezi, but for now, Clinton, if you just want to come back to close this off.
Aye, thanks, guys. Yeah, look, it answers some of my questions. And yes, the main thing is, if we as business or factory owners go the financial route of embarking on the verification, obviously, it has to count for something in that extent. My other concern is, well, let's say half of us do this and get the verification. How is this local content, if the act is passed and we do get it? I hope for our sake or for everyone else's sake, the economy's sake, that we do get it through Parliament, that it becomes a requirement again. How is it going to be policed? Because that used to be the biggest problem in the past. And I'm speaking from experience because I was the local content officer appointed by the furniture industry for a number of years, as well as the technical officer, purely because of my background of 30 years experience in manufacturing. So, and I was tasked to look at the government tenders before it gets issued, to make sure that it will comply either with local content or as an advisor to see whether or not the imported product cannot be manufactured locally. And I got into quite a bit of spat with government officials with regards to that, because they buy with their eyes and it's not their money. And that was a big change, a big issue for them to grapple with. Secondly, my concern, and as I said, as you're saying right now, it is up to the state organ or the department to include it into their tender for now. No disrespect to state workers, or state organ employees, but if you're asking them to do something out of their own reconnaissance, it requires work from their side, and knowing the average person out there, they are not going to go the extra mile if it entails them to do extra work. So I think before I embark on something like this, and this is my personal opinion, I would rather want this act to be passed through Parliament before I'm going to, because it can take another 5 years or 3 years. We don't know. What's disappointing as well is when the president makes his speeches, he always refers to the local content or the local furniture industry that is being supported by government. Yet we have abolished this thing. So yeah, it is a sore point for me. You guys don't know me, but I am a bit of a fly in an ointment always when it comes to things like this. Riza, I'd like to engage with you more, get your feel on things, seeing that you are based in the Western Cape. Hear what's your background, and if I can advise you in terms of what the challenges were that we've encountered over the past 6-7 years that we've been trying to police this act. I personally have written up a few departments that have not complied with Local Content Act, and I didn't come off as a favorite there, but what the act said and what it was, and that is what I embarked on. So yeah, Riza, I'll be glad to engage with you in the future as well. But from my perspective, I would rather wait for the act to be passed before I embark on a cost like that. And also, Riza, just for future, I would like to look at the cost of the verification, because we're not sitting on a bank account that's brimming over. So yeah, it is something that needs to be planned forward if it's going to be a significant cost. Thank you, guys.
I think, Clinton, if
No,
I may
that's good.
respond
Yep.
to that, with regards to cost, Clinton, I think Dinesh alluded to that earlier. So there are mechanisms we can employ to reduce cost. Should we look at the target audience in the furniture industry, and you all potentially use similar suppliers, etc., that could potentially allow us to reduce cost to a certain degree. Another one of the factors that we've employed in many of our certification engagements, and that goes beyond just the local content, is from time to time we do find, and rightfully, as you stated, our economy is under strain. We've got load shedding, we've got an unfavorable economic climate. We're at odds with what's going on at most times with regards to the direction our country is taking. So how do we as SABS further support yourselves as manufacturers through this quagmire, given the fact that you're trying to create jobs, trying to keep the lights on? I can only imagine the impact of load shedding on a business like yours, which would be high energy consumers because of all the equipment that you need to be running. So what we've done is we've also engaged the likes of these small enterprise development agency, and we've had good success in that space. And I'm not sure if any of the members, I'm assuming you probably have accessed funding from them in the past, but we've still got that avenue to kind of offset should CEDA find value in that investment. And we haven't had cases where that was refused as yet. So the funding is still available. And from a small economic development perspective, it speaks directly to the mandate given to that agency. So I don't know how to put it, but I'll be welcomed and glad to assist any of the applicants in obtaining a level of funding that could offset some of the costs for them, if that is viable and attainable at that given point in time. And yes, Clinton, it would be great to actually sit down and get into your head, because I can see the passion, I can feel it coming out. So thank you so much for your sharing.
Thank you, Riza. Sandile Buthelezi, your opportunity for question. If I can ask you also to switch on your camera. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandy Leptelezi from eThekwini Municipality, and it's great to be here today. The question that I had extends from Clinton's question, and the question is that in the past, for us to basically calculate the level of local content on a product, we would apply the local content formula, which I believe is still applicable in terms of the SABS standard. But moreover, we would also then engage the procurement organization, would obviously then engage the verification body or auditors in order to verify the local content that has been declared for that specific commodity. The other aspect of that was the number of exemptions that were submitted that also had an impact on the procurement process. And with that, some of the challenges that we've had as a city in the past are such that, number one, the number of exemptions were extremely high. The cost for the verification could not be absorbed by the procuring entity or by the bidders, and there was almost we couldn't identify where that cost would rest, and that obviously led to a lot of exemptions now coming into at play because of no one wanting to take ownership of the cost. We then had challenges with I'm not going to say, I'm not pointing a finger at SABS, but I just think that the capacity at SABS is limited to support metros with the level of and complexity of local content items. It's just impractical to have SABS providing guidance on each of our strategic commodities. Now, within the context of the current regulations, we've made provision for export orientation through the RDP goals as one of the specific goals that make up the preference point system. The challenge is being able to effectively apply the standard without there being any notable change in the support structure that comes from DTIC or SABS, and also clarity on where the costs lie in terms of the verification. I've also noted that the responsibility of the organs of states to have SABS standards in place, like the subscription with SABS, still rests with the organ of states. And there isn't a clear department that basically champions the relationship between the organ of states and SABS. So those are some of the complexities that we are facing at the moment. Whilst we are geared to promoting jobs, we're just wanting some guidance and some reassurance in terms of how can we unblock those specific issues, because these are practical issues that we face both at a bid specification committee level and at a technical level when the departments are compiling the specifications and evaluating those items. If I could just have some guidance there, and also if we could also have some guidance in terms of there was reference to a local content act in the past, and we are looking at putting together our own local procurement policy or targeted procurement policy as a city. And with that, it requires us to have done sector studies looking at the market composition, the industry levels, the number of participants, having understanding where there are monopolies and looking for opportunities to unblock those monopolies, and the extent of research and engagement that needs to be undertaken. It basically means that we feel as though we are not adequately equipped to basically approach or apply or implement local content effectively, because there have to be set targets that the city sets, which are informed by a baseline study. And in most cases, the baseline studies are absent, and therefore we can't have local content targets at a city level or procurement entity level. So what sort of support can be provided, or are there any best practices that are applied in other organs of states across the country that we could learn from, that can help us to effectively implement local content? Thanks.
Great, thanks. Bjorn, I'll take that. Thanks, Andile, and I think those were insightful, questions, and I think very practical. It's what you're experiencing, on the ground at the moment. So I'm going to break this response up into 2 or 3 parts. The first part, and maybe from a SABS side, I think I can identify with the point you raised, because the way SABS was previously structured is that we almost had just different departments dealing with different aspects of our service provision. So we would literally have a division that just looked at the standards and making available. You spoke about subscriptions and the availability of standards, but that was being handled by one division. We had another division that looked at, the SABS mark and where the certification was being looked at. We had another division dealing with local content. So one of the things that we've done, and this has happened basically we in the phases of actually fully rolling that out as we speak. But from the 1st of April, we have now gone what we refer to as a one SABS approach, where we've moved the business into a very sectorial approach. So there's a bundle of services per se, and Riza would have highlighted to you that the work that he does is not just in the local content space, but he plays a role in other areas as well. So I think as a starting point to maybe, Sandile, just create a link for you, I think liaising directly with Riza in terms of that bundle of services that your particular area will require. I think that's the point you can use for now to make sure that you avoid the situation of dealing with multiple people at SABS. The second point you've raised around the work that needs to take place, the research, and to look at where do you focus. So it's important to just note there are 2 parts to what is being offered at the moment. And the first part is a lot of what you're highlighting is the work that DTIC does in terms of their mandate and the sector desk approach that they currently have. So there's a lot of the R&D work that the DTIC does within their sector desks. And I'm hoping that you could access that as a route. From a SABS perspective, we literally will come in when there is an application for a verification. And the main reason for that is to avoid a scenario where we find ourselves being referee and player in the same game. So from a SABS perspective, it's very much about dealing with the verification on a case-by-case basis and individually. So the last point that I think I picked up as a key point was that around costs. And what the DTIC has done, the Department of Public Enterprises has recently done as well, is that they've identified in the cases of bids where they've been winning bidders, once that winning bidder was appointed, and from my presentation, you would have picked up that any tenders that were awarded prior to the 16th of Jan, those tenders still follow the current, the legislation that was in place, which means all of those tenders are subject to verifications. And what the DTIC have done is that they should then, so the trigger point becomes when they get those winning bids sent to them, they would then forward that to the SABS. And what we are doing as we speak is we currently are at this point dealing with 15 verifications on behalf of the DTIC, and we've got 15 on behalf of DPE. And these 30 verifications are live at this moment, where we are looking to ensure that the message around someone bidding and then making sure that there's an independent verification done. And if there are repercussions, then the DTIC, the DPE, and the state-owned entity, so if it's Eskom or Transnet, they are waiting for these verification results to be shared with them so that they can either confirm, yes, they continue to deal with that supplier, or they take action against those suppliers. So I can confirm with you that from the experience we've had in this last 6 months, these entities are very active in wanting to ensure that they have these independent reports from SABS that they've paid for, which is DTI and DPE in these examples, and that actions are being taken where it becomes necessary from those entities. So Sandila, I hope that covers those questions that you had. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dinesh, for that response. Appreciate it. It is extremely helpful. I think the way forward will be for us to engage Riza and your office going forward. Thanks.
I think, Sandili, if I may come in, and thank you for your question. You've actually touched on something that I've been trying to champion for a number of years, based on the engagements we're having with multiple organs of state and the challenges within procurement. I wish to hazard and put my colleagues on the spot here, but I think it's long overdue that SABS invites procurement officers and potentially hosts a kind of a workshop where we can understand all the challenges and then assess how best do we respond to those challenges. And it's only when we speak to the likes of yourselves that we actually get to the nuts and bolts of what's holding the process back, or what's disabling, or where the potential gaps are in terms of costs and et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to get back to you and all the colleagues that are engaged in procurement, and I'll definitely come back with a program that we can put together as SABS and host a number of you and understand exactly what makes things unravel in that space, and find the best balance between the two on how to support and assist in terms of interpreting some of the standards, having that included in bids and proposals. And I'm sure that we can find a standardized approach to this, because you're all procuring similar same goods at the end of the day. So it's not going to be unique in most instances. So I welcome the engagement. Thank you for raising the questions, and thank you for sharing some of your realities. And again, echoing some of the noise that we're aware of, and pushing us into a space where we can actually think and come up with something that could be a lot more supportive and enabling. I look forward to engaging with you further on that, Sandile.
Thanks, Riza.
I don't see any other hands up. If there's any questions, please raise your hand so we can attend to those. If not, Bernadette, I don't know if you want to just maybe jump in.
Bjorn, you can also remind attendees that they're welcome to type their questions into the chat box. I know many people don't like to just go out there and say what's on their mind. Feel free, put it on the chat box. We'll respond to those questions. We'd like to hear a little bit more from the members as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bjorn. Thanks, Riza. Yeah, so just in terms of, I think we, at the end, if there's no more questions, Riza, I think also just to say to our participants that after this webinar, we will share the presentations with everyone in attendance. You're also then welcome. Riza and Dinesh has shared their contact details. We will share it with you again if you want to make a direct contact with Riza and Dinesh with regards to any questions that might come up after the webinar. So I think just in terms of Riza and Dinesh, the agenda, sorry, I don't have it in front of me now, but I think we've come to the end of the webinar. If we don't have any more questions, we'd like to then thank all the participants for their time. And yeah, and for SABS coming on board and assisting. And I'm sure it's going to be just based on the questions and the interaction from the participants. I'm looking forward to many more of these. There's been some suggestions on the table. We will definitely look into that, Dinesh and Riza. We will make contact with you just in terms of possibly even a follow-up webinar, so we can actually tackle those very burning matters, and then invite the participants again to participate in that phase of this process. So I'd hand over back to Bjorn, and that's all from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernadette. Yes, and for the participants as well, if you want to see this presentation live, we will place it on our YouTube channel. I've put the address in our chat, but we will also share that link with Bernadette so she can distribute, so everybody can have a look at it from that perspective. Just to close off, I don't know if Dinesh, you still want to just have something final say, and then we can close, or Riza, final say?
I think from our side, I can just come in just to thank the participants. I think the questions have certainly been insightful, and we will certainly work closely with the colleagues that are on the call, just to work through and wade through some of these areas. I just want to reiterate at this point, as we start to separate this between what's sitting in the space of policy, and then we target, and direct this to the right areas, I think we can make much more progress in this particular space, by approaching it in that way. But I think those are my final comments. Thank you again. Thanks, Riza. Thanks, Bjorn.
I think Bjorn, just on my departing statement, Clinton, thank you for the hard-hitting comments that you raised. I can definitely feel that there's experience and passion behind that, so I'm looking forward to engaging with you further. Sandy, thanks for raising some of the challenges you're experiencing. We hope that we can actually take the time out, find that balance, and try and support not yourself, but a lot more of the procuring officers in organs of state. And to the rest of the members, thank you for taking the time out to join us this morning. Bernadette and team, Nasli, for all the work behind the scenes. Thank you so much. Bjorn, you and your team. And yeah, we look forward to engaging further. You've got our details, and thanks. We've come to the end of this morning. Yeah,
thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think it was a very successful one. And if you have any questions, you're always free to contact us. Remember, we're on social media as well, where you can always find the latest documentation standards and everything you want to look at, and click through to our website. Then you get more information. Thank you very much. We're closing this webinar, and thanks a lot to everybody involved.